Joining us now to respond on behalf of the country's working class, our Congress of the South African Trade Unions Parliamentary Coordinator, Matthew Parks, and the South African Federation of Trade Unions spokesperson, Trevor Shaku. Gentlemen, good evening and good to have you with us tonight here on In Focus. The Reserve Bank, Trevor, saying that the options that were considered were the full range of options to be considered given the current state of the economy. Is this the best we could do?
Good evening, Trevor, and thanks for having us. The South African Federation of Trade Unions does not think this is the best we could do. At the heart of the problem, we think that lies the contradictions of capitalism themselves. One, Khanyago and Governor Khanyago and the South African Reserve Bank find themselves trapped in between the currency traders and also the household and businesses domestically. Because what you find, Tabo, is that the currency traders in the market are dumping currencies on the basis of the currency pairs. For instance, if South African currency is paired with the US dollar, and the US dollar on the 15th of June hiked their interest rates, the currency traders will dump the South African rand for the US dollar. And as a result, that on its own leads to the depreciation and the weakening of the South African rand. That has inflationary pressures, because what that means is that once the South African rand against the US dollar depreciates, the imports, and remember we are the net import as a country. So the imports which will be imported into the country will come very expensive, and that on its own would have inflationary pressures. But on the other side of this very trap which I mentioned is that if, for instance, the Monetary Policy Committee intervenes now to raise the interest rate hikes, trying to ensure that they're in tandem with the Fed's hikes in the United States, what you then find is that the very interest rate domestically have two pressures. The first pressure is inflationary, and the second pressure is and can even lead to retrenchment. The inflationary pressure that the very interest rates will have, which in our view becomes not a proper tool of solving the inflation in the country, is because once you raise the interest rate hikes, you have small business and domestically and households who have financial liabilities with the banks. And as a result, the cost of their debt increases, and as a result, that leads to the debt servicing costs increasing for themselves. Yeah. And for instance, businesses absorb such debt through prices, and as a result, it also has inflationary pressures because they factor that into the price of goods they sell. And on the other side, for those small businesses which cannot absorb these particular interest hikes, they may lead to default, and after defaulting, some of these businesses might close, leading to retrenchment. And of course, for the ordinary households, the ordinary workers, this has serious impact also. We know, as a matter of fact, that in this country, the First National Bank study published earlier this year showed that most of our people, most of the workers in the country, do not spend their money within 80% of their money within 5 days of earning.
Paying debts, yeah.
And as a result, what you then find is that 70 to 75% of their disposable income is actually dedicated to service debt, either a home loan, either a house loan, either a mortgage, either a car loan, or any form of credit facility. So in that instance, when you raise interest rate hikes, not only are you hurting these businesses, but you're also making debt very expensive for the very household.
All right. Matthew, let's bring you in here. I mean, the Reserve Bank, to that point, saying that if we do not front load these hikes, if we fail to deal with the inflation now in such a manner, we will have a dire situation down the line that would certainly be even more dire to the economy.
Yeah, look, as COSATU, we must really condemn the Reserve Bank and government. This is a huge blow to workers, to the economy. It's unnecessary. The 75 basis point means that workers are going to struggle to take care of their families. They're going to struggle to pay for the credit cards, the store loans, the home loans, the car loans. It's going to plunge workers already indebted into further despair. It's going to suffocate the economy. It's going to make it difficult for businesses to pay workers, to save jobs, and even to create jobs. And this is against a backdrop of an unemployment rate of 45%, an economy in deep recession, still recovering from COVID-19, having lost 2.2 million jobs, suffering from load shedding, from fuel price hikes, and now we choose to shoot the economy in the feet. This is unbelievable. But again, we have to ask, and we appreciate the need to manage inflation, because if inflation gets out of control, it's going to bleed workers very small wages. It's going to make it very difficult for workers to survive. But what do you do next? Because the inflation is caused by the war in Ukraine, by international oil prices. That's what's causing it. We can do nothing about that. Those things may continue for some time. So what are we going to do? Is the Reserve Bank going to increase the repo rate every single month until the economy virtually collapses? That will be economic suicide. We think, though, having said that, we must really ask government to come to the party now. Yeah. I think we cannot afford for government to be sitting on the sidelines. The Ministers of Finance and Mineral and Energy Resources promised in May, and in fact the previous Minister of Energy Resources promised in 2018 to review the fuel price taxes, which consume about 9 rand a litre, 32% of our fuel taxes, to reduce them. They can do that now. They can provide immediate relief to workers, to the economy. But there's other measures we need to look at too. We are meant to have a Minister of Transport. We're not sure where is he. But he should be focused on getting all metro rail lines back operational, because that will assist 10 million commuters in our cities to get to work, to get out of cars and fuel-driven transport. If we can fix Transnet, that can help agricultural goods move off from road into rail, help insulate food from inflation. But we also need to see the Department of Transport retabling the RAF and the RAPS bills of Parliament, again, because that's going to help set the RAF back on a sustainable financial trajectory. We had raised this COSATU in 2019 already in the Eskom Social Compact. Let's cut the Eskom debt by half, from 400 to 200 billion rand. That's going to ease Eskom's burden. It will help it to focus on maintenance and new generation, which will help to reduce load shedding. It will also help to insulate Eskom from having to demand double-digit tariff hikes all the time. So those are the two key sources of inflation. We don't see government moving, and we are simply running out of time as an economy.
Trevor, what are the options there, considering that, given the current data, right, you've got the risk of growth. The economy is going to grow by 2%, which maybe is projected a little bit higher from the 1.7%. You've got inflation sitting at 7.4%, the highest it's been in a decade. And you've got the central banks abroad looking hawkish, and the Reserve Bank saying we've got no choice but to take this aggressive stunt, particularly looking at the fact that we might only return to the mid-range of 4.5% by the fourth quarter of 2024.
First of all, if you look at the projected inflation, for instance, the people who will suffer here is the working class. Let me start by saying that. Because if you look at the inflation, average inflation for this year, it is projected revised to 6.5. But the wage inflation is revised to about 5.5%. This means that the wages of workers aggregate, or in total, will not grow in tandem with the inflation, or at least even above inflation. And this is the reason why, and you can see it in various industries and sectors of the economy, where firstly in the public sector, government is refusing to give the public servants an above inflation increases. So what Khanya was presenting today is a reflection of that, where bosses in the private sector have been refusing to give workers above inflation increases. Now, that having been said, the issues around targeting, inflation targeting, where the Reserve Bank mainly just use interest rate to target that, is very problematic for us. Because, like I said at the beginning, these are the contradictions of capital playing themselves out. But beyond that, you look at, for instance, the underutilization capacity of the manufacturing sector in the past period. For instance, one index I was looking at earlier shows that the manufacturing capacity since 2000 has never been utilized to full capacity, and as a result has floated above 10% to even sometimes 23%. And at the current moment, it is estimated to be above 20%. So that means the manufacturing industry is not being utilized to capacity. And we think, as Comrade Parks says, that government must intervene, because in our view, it is not a question of monetary policy at the current moment to intervene to ensure that you stabilize the flames of inflation. What you need at the current moment, you also need the fiscal side, the fiscal policy to play its part. And this is the reason where we come in to say government must come in to ensure that it takes those particular parts of the manufacturing capacity which are not utilized, nationalize them and ensure that there is productivity that is going on. Because at the current moment, what you need is to increase the supply of goods in the economy so that no demand will threaten you with inflation. And we have already demonstrated that demand is not at the heart of this particular inflation. In fact, if you check the GDP statistics for quarter one of 2022, you'll realize that GDP grew by 1.9%, and at the same time, the general consumption also grew by 1.9%. This shows you an equilibrium of production and consumption. As a result, there is no inflationary pressure in that instance. In 2021, the same statistics on the GDP showed that GDP grew by 0.1% high above the consumption levels. This shows you that there was a lot than there was consumption. As a result, it cannot be demand side which has stoked these particular flames of inflation. And we point out to, one, the currency traders, who as a result of their bid to profiteer out of trading currencies are actually the ones pushing Khanyawa and the central bank to a high interest rate whilst trying to stabilize inflation.
So I want to take you back to that index of the manufacturing capacity. How do we raise that manufacturing capacity facing the energy crisis that we are currently facing in the country, triggered by the challenges at Eskom and maybe by and large by the Russia war, which will likely persist?
The first part is that we indeed have energy problems as a result of the mismanagement of Eskom by the African National Congress government. But secondly, we welcome the proposition which would have been said at the South African Communist Party's Congress, that they are intending to build a second utility which would supply energy in the country. Because we, in our view, think that the underutilization capacity of the industry, of the manufacturing industry, ought to at least be taken by government, and government must power such particular underutilized capacity of that manufacturing industry to ensure that it empowers even many people who at the current moment, for instance, have been chucked out of doing business because of various pressures in the economy, so that we are able to start production at that level. But most importantly, there is a statistics that also showed that the number of farms and farmers have actually declined since 1994 to 2022. What that tells you is that the number of agricultural produce or products is not keeping in line with the population growth in the country, and as a result, that on its own will be underutilization because there's a lot of arable land, a wide range of arable land, which could be made at the disposal of the people to be able to plant, so that we are able to increase the food production capacity in the country, so that we do not have, for instance, supply below demand, which eventually might lead to such particular inflationary pressure. So in this instance, government must play a very critical role in increasing the production capacity in the manufacturing sector, in agriculture sector, but also in transport, because the production alone is not enough. Capitalism as a whole operates on the basis of production and distribution. So you need communication and transportation to be developed properly. And Eskom, Transnet are key to this.
So, Matthew, we've been asking, by the way, to speak to Treasury around this particular issue of the handling of the Eskom debt. They're saying, well, they're not ready. When they're ready to make the announcement, they'll probably come and talk to us. But we are hearing, coming out of the SACP conference, this idea, largely coming from the Minister of Energy, Gwede Mantashe, of a second power utility that is also state-owned. Others are saying maybe the president was a little bit too excited about it, and he has backtracked since from that to say, no, the success of Eskom is rather important. What is COSATU's view on a second generating utility that is state-owned?
Yeah. Look, just on your first comment, it's not acceptable for government to say they need more time to consider Eskom's debt burden. We don't have time. We have an unemployment rate of 45%. What bigger crisis do we need to concentrate our minds to resolve our crisis? This is not that complicated. Eskom has got a debt of 400 billion rand. They said they can manage a debt level of 200 billion rand. So we need to cut it by half. We made proposals which government signed at NEDLAC in 2020 on how to reduce the debt. From the fiscus, from investors, etc., we can assist. We don't have the luxury of time. We cannot afford government to dilly-dally when workers' jobs are being shed left, right, and center, when companies are closing left, right, and center. So government needs to get it moving. We have an engagement with government. We want to see something done by the medium-term budget statement in October. We cannot go beyond that. This is enough now. We need to get cracking with speed. So we appreciate the technical work being done at government on debt options. It's fine. Let's make a decision. Let's implement. Let's move. But look, in terms of a second SOE to provide renewable energy, look, that's fine. I think for us right now, that will take time. You're not going to set up an SOE tomorrow. You'd have to put the legislative framework in place, allocate resources. That's going to be a 5-year exercise. We need to provide energy tomorrow, the day after that. So we need to fix Eskom. So let's fix Eskom. Let's cut its debt by half so it has capital, it's got money to invest in maintenance. That's going to assist it to ease the load shedding. If you ease load shedding, you're going to free billions of rands every single day into the economy, help companies sell their products, help them to pay their workers, etc. Let's further tackle on the issue of corruption. Eskom has been doing some good work on recovering billions of rands looted from it by criminals locally and overseas. But where is the NPA? The NPA needs to wake up and go and arrest these people. It cannot simply be Eskom on its own pursuing civil claims. We do need to see government also saying through the COP26 that 131 plus billion rand, let's get it to Eskom, let's finalize the details so it can enable Eskom to invest in renewable energy itself, not just as a purchaser from the private sector, but itself to own renewable energy, because that's going to help it to reduce its operating costs, help it to get on a financial sustainable path. Set up a second SOE, that's fine, no problem. China has looked at competition between SOEs, that's fine. Competition has got value in terms of dealing with monopolistic behavior, prices, inefficiencies, etc. But that's for another day. Today we need to fix Eskom. We don't have a choice. Eskom generates 95% of our electricity. It transmits and distributes 100%. We have no choice but to fix Eskom if we're to fix this economy, reduce unemployment, and assist workers to survive and take care of their families.
Yeah. In terms of then the fuel itself, so as COSATU, you will not be in support of deregulation, but I suppose, as you mentioned, the basic fuel levy is something that needs to be looked at, maybe restructured, the amendments to the road accident fund, and maybe look at those particular instruments as something to adjust and give the workers some relief.
Look, we think we need to have a fuel price regime discussion. We think, deregulation might have some pros and cons. We must see what are the pros and cons. Diesel, for example, is partially deregulated now, but right now actually diesel is more expensive than petrol. But it has allowed, competition between different petrol stations. But look, the biggest thing we can do right now on the fuel prices is to reduce the government taxes. That's 9 rand a litre. That's 32%. Even if you reduce it by a quarter, by a third, that's going to give immediate relief to workers and to the economy, to businesses. Yeah. That's something the government did in May. It's something the government can do now. The other things, sure, we need to do them. They're medium-term, long-term. Fix metro rail, fix the road accident fund, invest in public transport, move to electric vehicles. But what government can do tomorrow morning is to reduce the taxes on the fuel price regime.
There is the challenge then of 90 billion rands to the fiscus that is brought by these taxes. Where do we get that money with public workers also wanting an increase, with the Eskom debt that needs to be taken care of? So where is all this money going to come from?
That was quite simple. Invest in the South African Revenue Service. If you give SARS 10 billion rand, they can easily generate an additional 50 billion rand in tax collection, not through new taxes, by simply going after that 30% of society which doesn't pay tax currently. Just to enable them. The reason why we generate an additional 60 billion rand in this budget year is because SARS employed an additional 500 workers. It invested in its IT systems. It started tackling tax evasion, customs fraud. It started going after the wealthy who know how to avoid paying taxes. So give SARS 10 million rand, they will give you an additional 50 billion rand. Give them 20 billion rand, they will recover an additional 100 billion rand. Our tax compliance right now is about 60%. If you go to Europe and leave aside the bad comparisons, it's 90%. So even if we can get to 65%, that would be a huge generation. And it's simply invest in SARS. SARS is doing well to turn the corner from state capture, from corruption. It's got new management in place. Its workers have done very well. So that for us is the quickest way. Of course, the other harder question is, Thabo, is can we stop stealing from government? Can we stop looting billions of rands all the time? Yeah. Can the NPA finally wake up and take some people to prison, recover the assets? That's how you ought to generate the money.
Right. Trevor, you've already touched on what we need to do on the agricultural side. Headline inflation, of course, is made up of electricity, is made up of food, and it's made up of petroleum. So what do we need to do on the fuel price side?
Firstly, we must start by saying that we do not think it is merely the question of the fuel levies that is responsible for the increases in fuel and petroleum. What you actually find there is a group of so-called commodity traders who actually use, for instance, opportunities like wars and destabilization, political instabilities and all that, to hoard these goods and at the later stage allow, obviously by holding these goods, they then drive up prices. They create an impression of a shortage first, drive up prices, and eventually you realize that the prices of these particular goods, which are hoarded either by the commodity traders through the options or the futures market, eventually this drives up the prices of these particular goods. And for instance, oil is one of those particular goods which is dealt with in the futures market, which is dealt with by the commodity traders who hoard it. And I have no doubt that at the current moment, you would have, if investigations were to be done, people or certain corporations and those people who are dealing in commodities at an international level would have taken advantage of the war in Ukraine by Russia to ensure that they inflate the prices of these particular goods and drive up prices for consumers. Now, as a result, you are not going to solve the question of fuel and petroleum prices by merely dealing with the question of the fuel levy. Indeed, if the ANC government, which has accepted neoliberalism as a model and a framework of its economy, if you then remove the fuel levy, the 90 billion which would be lost as a result of this particular fuel levy being removed, because we collect a lot of money from that fuel levy, you will start seeing government, the ANC government, to which COSATU is part of, it will start cutting, already it is cutting on the public goods and services. Yeah. But you know our position, Thabo. In the previous discussions, we would have mentioned that we do not think that to give, let's say they were to remove that fuel levy, but we do not, beyond that, we do not think that government spending should depend mainly on tax. Government has the ability to embark on net expenditure, and that can be financed in various manners. For instance, the South African government holds about 895 of the U.S. reserves. You only need 300 billion of those as import cover, and the rest are in excess. And as a result, those are some of the things in our view which you could use. But more importantly, the question of fuel is also the question, in our view, of the contradictions of capitalism. Because beyond the commodity traders, what you then find is these commodity corporations which are monopolies international. And as a result, they are the price makers. And it is easy for them to be able to hike prices as they see fit. And this is the reason why you are seeing that particular problem globally.
Let's leave it there for tonight. I appreciate you both, gentlemen, for coming on tonight and sharing the side of Labour to the news of the repo rate hikes. Others saying these are the steepest we have seen, at least in a while.